Hello there, and welcome to another video. I am a big New Year's resolution person. I think that maybe this time it's gonna work. This time it will be my year. And usually I do pretty well until like March. Then I don't really care anymore. Well, okay, I still care, but I get what I think of as reverse sads. So I'm not depressed in the winter. I get really bummed out in the spring and the summer. Thankfully, moving to the Pacific Northwest has really helped with that because it's not like 95 degrees in April and I don't feel like I'm gonna die the second I go outside. All of that aside, I thought it could be fun to do a video on how to read more. I know a lot of people's New Year's resolution is to read more. Whether it's picking up a book for the first time or just making more time to read, I thought this could be a good idea. I could also use this, even though I do make book content. I'm really bad about putting down my book and picking up my phone, and that's something that I would like to get better at, especially like around bedtime. I play my connections games and then I think, I'm just gonna look at Twitter and Blue Sky for like a minute. And then it's 45 minutes and I'm not very sleepy. And that's 45 minutes I could and should have been reading on my Kindle. So I'm not saying that I'm perfect or really good at this, but maybe this is something we can work on together. I'm gonna start with the tools that I recommend to do this and then talk about some books that I would recommend that I think are really good for just jumping into reading, either for the first time or to get back into it after not reading for a while. My absolute number one tool that I recommend is the local library. Now you can go in person and get physical books, or as I really hope you've heard by now, you can get ebooks and audiobooks. So go to your local library's website and see what they have and what they use. I am in the US and living in Texas before and living in Oregon now. I have had zero problems with doing this. In Oregon, I even could sign up online and do everything online and then just go in person eventually to confirm everything and get like the physical card. But they probably have an app called Libby. Libby is wonderful. Libby is a home for audiobooks and ebooks and even like magazines and stuff too that you get for free. Now, if your library isn't good, that can happen. You have options. If you live in the state of Texas, you can join whatever Houston's main library is for free. You just have to prove that you live within the state of Texas. I think if you're in California, the San Diego library system will work for you. Same with like the New York Public Library if you live in New York State. Or there's some libraries that you can just pay to be a member of if you don't live there locally. Again, I live in Oregon and I haven't had any problems. I have a municipal library system that works really, really well. Yeah, you do have to wait for things sometimes. There can be a very long wait for some really big books. So just use your holds, build up that hold list as much as you can, and wait until you find something that you like that's available. There's gonna be something. You will be able to find something, I promise. Other good thing about Libby is you don't need an e-reader. Obviously, you can send books to your Kindle if you have one, but whatever you are watching this video on, you can read ebooks on. So if you have an iPhone, there's a books app that comes natively on your phone. I'm pretty sure it's on iPads too, and you can read in that. You can download it as just a text file, as like a document, and read it that way. There is nothing stopping you. Similarly with audiobooks, I don't have a lot of experience in this realm because, as I've said before, my brain just doesn't process audio that well, so I can't really do audiobooks. But Libby does have audiobooks. You can also use Libro.fm. It's kind of like Audible, but not an Amazon company, as far as I'm aware. If you utilize the Amazon ecosystem, don't quote me on this, but I'm pretty sure you can just get Audible credits as part of your Amazon Prime membership. So if you already have that, you should utilize that if that's something you're interested in. And also just physical library books. If you would prefer to read like an actual paper printed book and that's helpful for you, go find what paper books are at your library. I'm sure you also have secondhand stores. Go to your local independent bookstore if you have one. Bookshop.org is really great for supporting independent bookstores through the internet. I will say, and this isn't just because it's Amazon, but don't buy your books on Amazon because they ship them so poorly. I've bought books that were gifts for people on Amazon and just got in an endless loop of returning them because they were really, really beaten up by the time they got to me. Barnes & Noble, very good at packaging and shipping their books if you want to shop online through there. And just in person, bookstores are still on the decline, even the big chains like Barnes & Noble. So even just going into a Barnes & Noble and browsing and seeing what catches your eye can work. Okay, my second big tip is to set a goal, track your reading, and set a reward for yourself. This does not have to be buying a new book. This can be anything you've wanted that you just haven't done yet, or something you've been thinking about and you just haven't gotten yet. Just set a reward. That is the only thing that works for me on some things. I love a good habit tracker where you just mark off every single day that you've done something. You can do this if you have a planner or a bullet journal, you could do that. You can just make a grid in the Notes app and check everything off every day. You can just make a list of dates in your Notes app and check everything off. Just something written down somewhere that you check every single day that you did it. I will come back to this with something very helpful. It's useful in the next section. So you set the goal and you habit track. But I gotta be honest with you, the inherent good feeling of reaching your goal is not enough for me. I'm very internally motivated, don't get me wrong. But sometimes the feeling of, wow, I've exercised every day isn't the good enough feeling to actually do it, so I will set a reward. Sometimes this is going to a coffee shop an extra time a week that I haven't quite budgeted for, or going to Powell's. It's this incredibly huge bookstore in downtown Portland that is beautiful and wonderful, and I highly recommend visiting if you're ever in the area. Buying a shirt from Superyaki I've been wanting, splurging on yarn for a new project. Your reward can be anything that fits with your lifestyle and your budget, but just set one and write it at the top of your habit tracker. And not wanting to break that streak of doing it every day also really helps. I like to start with like a habit tracker for a month because I'm a paper planner girly. Okay, I'm a paper planner girly from like January to March. As I've already mentioned, we will see how this year goes. I think my new planner's getting here tomorrow. So you have a way to get your book. You have a way to read your book. You have your goal written down of reading every day. Other thing I think can help is setting a routine for it. So I had a really good running routine for a while. Well, I would get up, I would make my coffee, I would go back to bed because I'm not a morning person. I would put my phone where I couldn't reach it, and I would read and drink my coffee, and it was wonderful. As I said before, I'm also a bedtime reader. Find a piece of time that works for you. Is it listening to an audiobook while you drive to work? Is it reading on your public transit commute? Is it 10 minutes of peace and quiet after you put your kids to bed at night? Just find a time that works for you and try to do that every day. That'll also help with the routine. You get used to it. It's in your habit tracker. It's in your day-to-day. Just plan a little bit of time for it. So circling back on that habit tracker part, I'm sure you're wondering about my thoughts on like Goodreads. So if you have never heard of Goodreads before, it's kind of like the industry standard of a book tracking and review website. I don't love it personally, but I did start using it. I really like it because you basically can track when you started and when you finished your book. You can write a review, you can use stars or use words or do neither, and you can see everybody else's reviews and star ratings. I do not find those useful. Never have I read a book that was rated as 5 stars on Goodreads and enjoyed it. I really would more recommend finding people whose interests align with you, or I don't really like any of the books I found on Book Talk, but you might. So maybe renting a bunch of books from the library that you heard of on Book Talk and seeing if you like them. Or my Barnes & Noble always has a Book Talk table. I find a lot of BookTube reviews are better. There are a handful of people on Book Talk who I really trust, but the big Book Talk books I just haven't been a fan of. So if you try those and you do not like them, do not let that stop you. That is one very specific kind of book with one very specific audience. There are a lot of other books out there that are way better. Back on topic. So Goodreads. I used Goodreads, but what I don't like about it is you cannot track books you didn't finish. There's no way to do that unless you delineate it in your writings, or you only rank all your DNFs the same star rating, 1 star. There's no separate list for it. So this year I switched to Storygraph, which a lot of people have been talking about lately as a Goodreads alternative because Goodreads did, again, get bought by Amazon, and some people don't want to support that. Here's what's cool about Storygraph is, as the name says, you get a bunch of cool graphs and you get a bunch of cool data, and you can track your DNFs. My problem is I really only read, as I learned from the graphs, horror, fantasy, and science fiction. It is between 300 to 400 pages long. That is intense and scary and has a lot of tension. And that's it. My graphs were basically just a big circle every time. So I didn't find that data useful, and I don't like the UI of it. I know it's a baby service, and I know they're trying to get people to buy premium so they have more funds to make more out of the app. It just wasn't really working for me. So I heard of something called Fable that I'm a huge fan of. I've been using for a couple months, and I'm going to continue using it next year. And if you're thinking, Rachel, you used Goodreads, Storygraph, and Fable all in the same year. Did you have to import your data every time? I did, because the first time I used Goodreads, I tried to use it as a tracking for all of my books, and that's not really how it works. So I kind of messed up my data. So when I imported my data for Goodreads to Storygraph, it was very wrong. I had to delete all of it, start over again. And you can't import from Storygraph, so I had to just manually put everything in Fable, which was fine. I have mentioned many times that I'm a deeply neurotic person, and this is just who I am. If you're wondering what I used for the tracking of my physical books, it is an app called Libib that I use to track my books and my Blu-ray collection. I'm thinking of doing a video about like the apps that I use, like Fable and Libib and stuff like that. So if that's interesting to you, let me know. I might just be the only person that does that and would care. Okay, so you've got your book, you've got your habit tracking, you've got your routine. But what are you gonna read? That's the hard part, right? You get in a reading slump and everything you try sucks, or is very poorly written, or is way too dense and difficult to get through. So here are my recommendations for books to get you to start reading. They are not bad, they are not overly simple, they are just, let's call it entry level. They're still good and they're still enjoyable, they're well written, they're just not like Charles Dickens or the Locked Tomb series. I think they're very approachable. Approachable is the word I'm going for. These are some books that I find very approachable. Starting with one of my favorite writers. Oh, I can't even get all of these in one. I can't even get all of these in frame. Okay, starting with Patricia Briggs. Okay, please don't judge this based on the cover. This cover is from 2006. It is of a time. This is not indicative of how the books actually are. The main character would hate being portrayed like this. So, with that out of the way, this is the Mercy Thompson series by Patricia Briggs. I would call this firmly urban fantasy, but not like a romance urban fantasy, if that makes sense. There is world building, there is character development, there is a lot of plot that happens. One of my favorite things is through all of these books, the choices that characters make matter, which sounds stupid, but you would be surprised how often things kind of just reset like a sitcom. In these books, fairies are real, but not like cute romance ACOTAR fairies, like Germanic lore, very deeply fucked up and dangerous fairies. Our main character, Mercy Thompson, is a mechanic who just happened to grow up with a werewolf pack because she can turn into a coyote. She doesn't know why she can turn into a coyote. Nobody does, but the closest thing her mom found was a werewolf pack, and so she was raised with a foster family of werewolves. In growing up in such a strict patriarchy, Mercy Thompson rejects all of it. She does not have a partner or a boyfriend. She lives alone, thank you very much, and she's fine with that. She's a VW mechanic who learned from a fairy, and if you know your lore and you're like fairies and automotives and like metals, yes, that does come up, and it's really, really cool, and I really love the way she does that. So these books are basically like a monster of the week in that each book focuses on some different supernatural creature or character that's been introduced before. The first book really talks about werewolves. We get ghosts, we get vampires, we get fae stuff, and I really like that because we get a variety of different characters and things that happen. It's not just like the same book happens every time, if that makes sense, because that can happen. It gets really boring. So there's a lot of character growth. The most important character growth, and this is a spoiler, but like you can really see it coming and it happens pretty early in the series. Mercy's neighbor is a very rich, very handsome werewolf who is the head of the local pack. Not only is she not interested in dating anyone, she's especially not interested in dating him. Not only is he very patriarchal, the head of a werewolf pack and a military background, but the head of the pack that she grew up with, who happens to be like the boss of all the werewolves in the US, asked him to keep an eye on her. Over the books, they do grow to like each other more, and it is a romance, but it's not the point of the books, and they're not romance novels. She has written romance novels with a little bit of spice that I just didn't enjoy as much. So this is more of like two human beings coming together in a relationship romance, not like an insta-love or spice. Everything is fade to black, closed door, which I so appreciate. So I really enjoy these. It is a strong female main character, but not like other girls main character. Like she's a girl's girl and she's here for her people. And it's such a fascinating, interesting series. I've read all of these books like 5 times and they are still coming out. The Magicians. Some of my favorite books of all time, to the point where I have a Break Bills tattoo. I love these books. If you have watched the show first, it really branches off in like season 2 into a completely different direction, which is fun and I appreciate, but it is not where the books go. So if you've watched the show, don't worry, you'll be fine. They've also changed the characters a lot, especially Penny. Book Penny and show Penny are completely different characters, and I appreciate that, and I think it's fun, but don't expect to find Penny in these books. If you haven't watched the show or read the books and you're like, Rachel, what the heck are you talking about? Magicians are about very smart college students who have been selected for a magical college called Breakbills. But that's just kind of like the background. The real plot is that our main character, Quentin Coldwater, who grew up being obsessed with what I like to call legally distinct from Narnia, in the books it's called Fillory, finds a portal and realizes that Fillory is very real. And the books seem to have been written off of it on purpose. And that Fillory is in trouble and does need help. But that's also only like the main plot. There is so much character building and character growth and interesting things about coming of age. I think they aged them up in the show to be like a grad school, but in the books they're fresh out of high school. They're basically like growing up and going to a magical college, which this is a magic system that I really, really love. I wouldn't call it hard fantasy where like the rules of the magic system are really complicated and really intense. It's basically just that like some people are better at doing magic than others. You're kind of born with it. I appreciate that it doesn't go in like a eugenics way that a lot of magic systems do, where you can just innately do things. But it's just like a secret society that you get inducted into, and you do have to go to college for it because having an innate ability to do magic and learning the science of how to do magic are very different. The first book is kind of an academia, and a lot of stuff does happen at school that's very important, but they're not at school the entire time. They also do something incredible in book 2. The second book, as you can tell I've read it the most, is absolutely my favorite. It is very weird to have the second book in a series be my favorite, and I'm aware of that, but I love the main character. I think it's just beautiful. I love these books. I love the feeling of growing up through them. I read them when I was in college for the first time, so I think that's why they hit so hard. I think it's also such a fun twist on something like growing up reading the Chronicles of Narnia, which of course I did, of just learning that the magic world you were obsessed with is actually real, and it is like how you thought it was, but also you're an adult, not a child, and so it's really nothing like how you thought it would be. I think these are so interesting, and I love each and every character. I did absolutely hate the ending of the last book the first time I read it, but I marinated on it and I worked through it, and I do feel a little better about it. The also really important thing about these is that magic is very dangerous. You can very easily kill yourself or other people by doing magic wrong, doing magic beyond what you think you can do, not knowing how to do a spell properly. So it's not like a safe book series. There aren't like bumpers on things. It does get very bleak and brutal, and I think that's really fun, juxtaposed with the feeling of going to Narnia. I maybe should have written a script for this. I'm kind of just like made a list of the books to talk about, and I feel like maybe I should have scripted this more. So I'm sure this is going great for you, and I'm sure editing me is having a really fun time. If you have been wanting to dip your toes into science fiction, but you've been really overwhelmed by everything, or you're a really big fan of the Vlogbrothers, you absolutely should read Hank's 2 books, An Absolutely Remarkable Thing, and A Beautifully Foolish Endeavor. So if you've watched the Vlogbrothers or any Hank Green content, you kind of know his voice, and it is very apparent in these books in a way that I found enjoyable, not annoying. It wasn't like I was thinking Hank Green wrote this the entire time. It was just a voice that I enjoy and I'm familiar with. I also really like these books because they do one of my favorite things, where there's the plot of what happens in the book and what the book's about, but then there's like what the book is really about and what the book is actually telling you. The book is about 23-year-old April May, who's running through the streets of New York in the middle of the night, on like a jog, not like running from someone, and finds a giant robot statue. She takes a little video of it, posts it online, doesn't think about it, and in the morning has gone mega viral. She is like famous. Also very interesting to note, this came out in 2018, which is pre-TikTok. I feel like TikTok has really catapulted a lot of people to fame like this, and this doesn't really talk about it in the realm of TikTok because TikTok didn't exist yet. So in the morning, April learns that not only has her video gotten mega viral, but a bunch of these robots have been found across the world, and she was the first one to document it. So she has this newfound fame that as a broke 23-year-old she wants to capitalize on. She also wants to find out what these robots that she's called Carls, what the Carls are, where they came from, what they're doing here. So while this is a book about what are these robots and did they come from outer space, it's also just a story about social media. What do you do when this happens? How do you manage your relationships and your friendships? How does it change you before you even notice that it changed you? So I think these are very, very fun books that also really did make me think about social media and how I present myself and all those fun kinds of things. That even if you don't productively post on social media, even if you just watch videos and consume content yourself, which is fine. Obviously, no one should be doing this. It's really fun and really enjoyable, and I think it makes you think about that. The sequel goes into it in a completely different way, and I did enjoy the sequel, but I think the first book was better. So, An Absolutely Remarkable Thing by Hank Green. Wonderful. Oh, one last thing. If you've read John Green, his brother's books, and didn't like them, don't let that stop you. I also don't like John Green's fiction books. It's just a lot of people standing in rooms talking, the thing that he's been very upfront with saying. This is not like that at all. This is a lot of dynamic things happening and not just people talking in rooms that aren't described. So don't let not liking John's books stop you from trying Hank's books. A completely different kind of science fiction, but I feel is equally approachable, is the Murderbot Diaries series by Martha Wells. I have read All Systems Red and Artificial Condition. I would love to read more of them, but the wait at the library is insane, and these are $19 a piece for what I read in basically an afternoon, so that's a little steep. So our main character, Murderbot, he is a security robot following a group of scientists on a new planet on a reconnaissance mission. He's not there by choice. He is owned by one of the mega conglomerations that support these scientific endeavors. And part of using their services to get here is that you have to pay for a security robot. The twist with Murderbot is that he hacked his governor. And he doesn't want to do this. He doesn't care about humans. He's never really cared about humans. He just wants to hang out and watch all the reality TV that he's downloaded. Which, same. Very relatable for someone named Murderbot. We also learn that something happened in his past that completely blacked out his memory, and he kind of wants to find out what happened, so that's the trajectory of the next books. And it is just so interesting. I love robots. I grew up watching Star Wars as a kid, Johnny Five movie. I'm just a robot kind of person, so I thought this was a really interesting take on it. And I'm not sure if it's a spoiler, but learning what physically a Murderbot is and how people interact with that and interact with him as a person robot, I think was really interesting. I love a science fiction story that is about the underlying humanity of all of us and the things that we have in common. And I think it's also really fun having just the ultra-capitalist future that we're kind of already in. So it's very approachable. They're very short, so you don't feel intimidated by something really long, but there are a bajillion books in this series, and I think that it's a really fun place to start. It's also very, I'm not sure how to say this, the writing style is very easy and fun to read. Not that it's talking down to you, it's just not doing a Dune thing where everything is technobabble and nothing is explained and you have no idea what's going on. This is very much this is a not so distant future from what we live in right now. So you pick up on what's happening and you understand what's happening. It's not that the science fiction of it is the point. The humanity of Murderbot is the point. 10 out of 10, highly recommend. I think these are great and such easy little reads. For more approachable fantasy, we have the Darker Shade of Magic series by V.E. Schwab. So I've read the first two books, and then I kind of just didn't read the third one, even though I bought it. So I currently just finished reading the first one, and I'm halfway through rereading the second one. So these are very fresh on my mind, and I know exactly what I'm talking about this time. Don't be overwhelmed by the setting of this book, because it sounds a lot harder to understand than it is in the book. It is fantasy, it is high fantasy, but it's not hard high fantasy. The magic system in the world they live in is the setting, it is important, but it's not the point of the stories. It's not just someone making a world to hang out in. So don't get overwhelmed by this. I think this is a really great starting point for fantasy. So our main character is Kel. He is called an Antari, and he can do a very rare kind of magic that other people can't, where he can travel either different places in the same world or the same place between worlds. So Kel lives in Red London, which is very similar to our London geographically, but nothing else is the same. Almost everyone can do magic of some sort. He's one of the only ones that can travel. Since Kel can do this, he is employed by the Crown to bring messages to the kings of the different Londons. So they're basically parallel universes stacked together in a book. So he can be in one place in Red London and travel to be geographically in the same place in Grey London. Grey London is, I think, just our London. I haven't fact-checked the name of the king because I don't care that much, but it's very like late 1800s, industrialized, everything is sooty and grey and smoky, and no one has magic. There is also White London, where a lot of people have magic, but a spoiler that I'm not going to talk about has happened in the past and kind of blighted the world. Everything is very white and pale. Some people can do magic. People that can do magic are very powerful. People will attack you to get that power and try to move up the ranks. Their rulers are a king and queen who are a brother and sister and are just incredibly ruthless. Then we have Black London. And again, because of a spoiler, I'm not really going to talk a lot about it, but Black London has been walled off and is no longer accessible. And walling off Black London did what happened to White London, and it has kind of affected everything. So the book has you thinking about not just the plotline of what's happening with Kel. Oh, and the other main character, sorry, I got distracted. Delilah Bard. She is a wannabe pirate in Grey London, and all she wants to do is be a pirate, but right now she's just kind of a petty thief. She's not just like a petty thief. She has wanted posters. She's kind of famous for the persona she has, and that's why she hasn't gotten caught yet. But she meets Kel, demands to be taken to a world with magic. The book is about them interacting and doing things, and what Kel is doing and what the other Antari messenger is doing, and thinking about why aren't there more Antari. But it's also thinking about who walled off Black London and who made the decision to affect the other Londons. When the kings and the queens know about all the other Londons, how does that affect their interacting with people and what they might doing in their plans? So there is a lot of court intrigue at times. The second book I really love because it does one of my favorite things, which is basically we're doing a Magic Olympics. We're bringing all these different nations together and they're sending their best, but since magic is real and that's a lot more fun than sports, we're doing a Magic Olympics, and I really think that's so much fun. Third book I'll report back once I finally read it. I don't know why I never read it. So these are very fun books. They're very easily read. They're very fun. They don't get too bogged down on how the magic of things work. So these I think are really approachable. The characters are really fun and lovable. And I think this is a good way to see if you like fantasy before diving into like a very intense Brandon Sanderson high fantasy. It's not that it's bad. It's not that it's simple. It's just a different structure of storytelling that isn't so this is our world and this is our world base and everything is completely different and it's very foreign and you have to dig through a lot. This is very approachable. If you should just drink every time I say approachable at this point. For great entry-level fantasy, I don't think you can get better than T. Kingfisher. Yes, I have talked about T. Kingfisher, and I think literally every video that I've made so far, fight me about it. What I love about T. Kingfisher fantasy is that, again, the world building is very approachable. All of her fantasy worlds feel very D&D, like Dungeons & Dragons world inspired. So if you have an idea of how the world of Dungeons & Dragons works, you'll be absolutely fine in this. I really like this Paladin's Grace series, which is technically romance, and I don't usually like romance, but there is so much like plot and other stuff happening that I think it doesn't just hinge on these two characters talking in a room. Paladin's Grace is about, what's our boy? Our boy Steven, who is a paladin, so that means that he gets magic in exchange for working for his god, basically. But his god dies, and he kind of goes on a rampage because when you're a killing machine and you were killing in the name of your god, and then your god dies, you got a lot of like rage to work through, and you've got like a weapon at hand. So he's working through what happened with that, and he feels like he doesn't deserve anything because his god has abandoned him and he did bad things, and he doesn't know what he's doing. He spent the last few years in a fog. Enter Grace, who literally walks into a murder scene by accident with him in an alley. And the plot goes from there. It's fun, it's cute, it's very warm. This is the closest to like a cozy fantasy that I would recommend. I just think it's so fun and light and enjoyable, and there are a bajillion books in this series because each one of the paladins gets his own book. T. Kingfisher's written a lot of other fantasy like Nettle and Bone and The Wonder Engine and The Clockwork Boys. So if you like the idea of like low fantasy, well, yeah, I guess it's low, like a low fantasy in an inspired by D&D kind of setting, just pick up any T. Kingfisher fantasy book and you will appreciate it. She does write horror. Make sure you're getting a fantasy one, not a horror one. But I just think this is really easy and enjoyable and fun, and I think this would be a great way to just wind down after a hard day. I cannot talk about approachable fantasy without mentioning our Lord and Savior Holly Black. You have probably heard of Holly Black books, especially with how huge they've gotten over the last few years. I think it's well deserved. This is one of the only book talk favorites that I love, and that's probably because I started reading Holly Black when I was like 13 when her first modern fairy tale book came out, and it blew my mind and changed how I thought about everything with writing and reading and what kind of stories you could tell. These are very much YA, and some of my friends have had problems because they are teenage characters with teenage feelings making teenage choices. So I will say up front, if that will bother you, just don't read it. You won't enjoy it, but that's fine. These books take place in a very large, well, okay, it's funny, large in number of books, but small geographically because it's all on like the eastern seaboard and basically mostly in New Jersey. But there's a lot of books in this canon, if you will, at this point. Holly Black writes books about, as I said, modern fairy tales. And it is, again, not like Tinkerbell fairy tales. It's like Welsh mythology, German mythology. These fairies are gonna hate you and kill you. So the main one everyone recommends is the Cruel Prince series. Basically, in broad strokes, Jude and her twin sister Taryn are human and grew up in the human world. But their older sister is half fairy because her mom used to be married to a redcap, and that marriage obviously didn't go well, so she took their daughter and ran and married a human. Until the day that that redcap found them, killed Jude's mom and dad, and took them back to fairy. So they are now two humans growing up with the inhuman and magically powerful fae children of the court. That's pretty interesting. That's an interesting setup. People bill it as a romance. It's really not. It is an enemies to lovers and showed me that I'd like a good enemies to lovers, but that's like such a small portion of the book that don't get into this thinking there's going to be romance. It's a lot more like court intrigue and revenge and a little bit of war and like a good for her story. But if you like the idea of like Grimm's fairy tale style fairies interacting with humans in our world, give that a try because that's really what all the books are about. I really love, as a standalone, The Darkest Part of the Forest that came out before that. This is a story about a girl and her brother who live in, again, it's like New Jersey or something, but their town is famous because it lives basically on the edge of fairy. So fairies do come in and interact with people. And I love that the fairies, like if you live there and you're respectful, they'll leave you alone. But they will fuck with the tourist. My favorite example of this is one of the characters is, well, I guess two of the characters are twins. But originally what happened was the human had a baby and a fairy stole him and left a changeling behind. She realized that the changeling was not her kid, hunted down the mother and confronted her and went, "Give me my kid back." And they fought and she won the kid back. And she went, "No, I'm not giving you the changeling back. You abandoned your child. You abandoned your magical being with me. I'm its mom now." So two of the characters in the book are identical twins where one is human and one is fairy, and everyone just knows this story. Really fun, interesting take on this kind of story that I feel like can be really burned out elsewhere. Holly Black puts so much thought and effort and care into her world building and her characters and how they interact. And especially after reading her early stories when I was younger, seeing how far she's come as a writer for the Cruel Prince series is incredible. For a good horror recommendation, if you like slasher movies, you should read the My Heart is a Chainsaw series by Stephen Graham Jones. I don't love slashers, but I am still enjoying the trilogy. The main character is a senior in high school named Jay Daniels, but it's very much not YA. The main character just happens to be a teenager. She is obsessed with horror movies. So when things start setting up to seem like a slasher is going to emerge in her small town in rural Idaho, everyone thinks she's insane until a slasher does appear. So if you like that idea, these are great. Stephen Graham Jones writes incredible women. He drinks his women respecting juice. I love his books. I think they're incredible. If you don't like slashers, I recommend The Only Good Indians, but I will warn you that this has body horror. Like, body horror. Like, I put the book down and went, wow, that scene just kept going. This is a really hard one to describe without ruining it, but it's basically like a good for her revenge story, but we don't really know what she is and what's happening until you get pretty far into the book. It's all adult characters. It's definitely not a YA. Like I said, it gets body horror gore. I will also warn you, there's like a lot of basketball in this one, and I wasn't expecting that, and I don't really like basketball, but it kind of worked, so that's all over the place. But I think this is one that's much better if you just go in blind, and trust me, if you like watching horror movies that have more of a plot than jump scares, I think you would enjoy this one. I can't recommend books and not recommend Stephen King books. That's me. Come on, I love Stephen King so much. You can't see him because I have a special bookcase over there that I realize in hindsight would be cool to see. So Stephen King books are good, mostly. A lot of Stephen King books are really good, a lot of them are kind of mediocre, and some of them are genuinely bad. The top 4 that I would recommend are The Shining. It is a classic for a reason, and it is so different from the movie that I think if you watched the movie, you would still enjoy and feel the tension in the book. So if you have somehow never heard the story of The Shining, it is about a family with a young boy who move to a hotel in a remote part of the Colorado mountains to take care of it over the winter. Things get a little crazy from there. Where it differs from the Kubrick movie is that there is so much depth and nuance to Jack Torrance as a character. He isn't just a crazy wife beater. There is so much depth, and we get all of these flashbacks to how Jack got here as a person and how the family wound up at the Overlook. There is also a lot of magic in the hotel. I love when the haunted house is a character itself, and it very much is. This is not too long. Stephen King definitely has an editing problem, especially as he got more famous. This is tightly edited and well-paced, and it's not particularly scary to me in any way, but I think it's just a beautiful character study. Pet Sematary, again, a classic for a reason. This one is a lot like the movie, but I think that the spine-chilling terror and tension are enough that even if you know what happens, you still really enjoy this. There's a lot of good Stephen King that I'm not recommending because you've probably seen the movie first, and when you know what happens, there's no tension left. And Stephen King's whole thing is tension and foreshadowing. So Pet Sematary is about a family that moves to a new house on a very busy road. And that very busy road leads to a lot of pets getting hit by cars. Their elderly, kind neighbor shows them the cemetery that the neighborhood kids made, which is why it's spelled this way, because children made the sign. But beyond where they lay their pets to rest is a second cemetery that's a little bit older. And sometimes the things that you bury there come back. And it's great. You know what's going to happen. And the whole time, every time I read this, I'm just saying, don't do it. Don't do it. Please don't do it. You know it's not going to be good. Don't do it. But they do it anyway. The end is also very different from the movie, and I think it's just the perfect ending. The Outsider is one of his newer books, which means that it is a little bit longer, but I don't think it drags too far in any one place. This was, I think, an HBO show, so I don't know, Stephen King stuff gets adapted a lot. The Outsider is, I think, one of his best books about not knowing what's going to happen and having just the tension of the unknown. So this story is about a teacher who has his DNA found at a brutal rape and murder crime scene. But he has an ironclad alibi of where he was because he was at a work thing. So this is the story of trying to figure out who or what could have faked the DNA or planted the DNA as more killings continue. It's so interesting, and the tension is great, and it nails the ending, which a lot of Stephen King doesn't always do. If you want to dip your toes into some horror and you want to try some short stories, try You Like It Darker, his latest publication. I don't like short stories. I'm a known short story hater, and I thought this book was incredible. Now, don't get me wrong. Some of the short stories are very, very bad. Like, Willy the Weirdo wasn't really great. The Fifth Step wasn't really great. The Turbulence Expert is one of the dumbest things I've ever read, but I will unfortunately think of it every time I fly on a plane. But the good ones were really good. My favorite is more like a novella, because it's like just shy of 200 pages long, called Danny Coughlin's Bad Dream. That story is about a man who is a high school janitor, and he has a dream that's very vivid, and he can't stop thinking about it. The dream was of a dog coming up and chewing on a hand sticking out of the ground in the back of an abandoned gas station. He is a good Samaritan, and he thinks this could be someone's daughter. This could be someone's wife. He sees women as more than just their attachment to a man, but you know where I'm coming from. So he gets a burner phone, and he calls an anonymous tip. But it's 2024, and you can track those things, and they find him and they think, this is so remote, how could anyone else have known about this? He did it, he's guilty, he feels guilty, so he called it in. So it's this cat and mouse story of those two. This does have a lot of cops in it again. You are in the POV of the cop, but he is so just insane, like a psychopath, that it makes it interesting and not just being like, oh boy, we're in a cop's head. Also interesting, Stephen King tends to fall into this pitfall for me where we're in the point of view of a bad guy, and he's a bad guy. He doesn't respect women. He's racist, and like, it drives me insane because I get it and I don't want to be in that headspace anymore. This short story avoids that very handily. There's also The Answer Man was incredible. One of the short stories is Rattlesnakes, and it's a sequel to Cujo, a book that I have not read yet because I deeply love dogs. I really loved it, even though it was a sequel to a book I hadn't read. There's like 50-something years in between both stories, I think in real life and in the story itself. Rattlesnakes is, I think, the perfect Stephen King story because the bad guy is just the dumbest thing you can think of. Like, if I told you what it was, it doesn't sound scary. It's like, what are you talking about? That both doesn't make sense and is stupid and isn't scary. But when you read it in the book, it's really scary. You hear the wheels of a squeaky empty stroller and you get goosebumps. So I think it's just a great general idea of Stephen King's good writing. I think that's everything. That was a lot more than I planned, but I kind of want to give you like a breadth of ideas. If you read any of these and you like them, please let me know. If you read them and did not like them, you can still tell me. That's good feedback to have. I am not a monolith on what makes good fantasy or science fiction or horror. I also understand that I really only gave you those 3 options. They're the only 3 genres I read. I can't help it. That's who I am as a person. Yeah, that's the end of the video. If you could share and like and subscribe and do all those cool things, I would really appreciate it. I am on other social medias. I mostly talk about my crafting stuff on Instagram. I talk about books and stuff on TikTok, if TikTok still exists at the time of publishing this or of you watching it. And okay, I love you, bye.